Hey everyone, I hope you have been well, and I'm sorry for the lack of videos recently. I wanted to go more ham than I ended up going with vrising content with the Gloomrot update, but life has been a bit tough personally recently, and I've been drained. If you're watching this video on the day of it going live, just know I'm going on a vacation, and hopefully will be nice and refreshed when I return. That being said, let's get on to the topic of this video. What is next for vrising? While the recent Gloomrot update has brought us an amazing revamp to the game and fresh new content, the future is always worrisome. While we saw a great return of players for this update, the population is steadily trickling down to the lower pop it had during the many months waiting for Gloomrot to come out. You can't help but wonder when and what the next update will be. Now, Stunlock has spoken on this a few times in interviews and text. They enjoy big updates. During the development of this game, since it is early access, they are looking at releasing large updates to the game that'll be big and impactful to truly bring players back, but they won't be too frequent. I wouldn't expect another update for a minimum of 6 months, as when they do an update, it often means wiping, and they don't want to force too many wipes, especially in an early access. With these large updates, like we saw in Gloomrot, a lot of things are changed and revamped, so it makes sense that wiping is a huge factor for them, as you would no way be able to play on an old save prior to Gloomrot with it out now. That said, once the game fully releases, they plan on doing more regular, smaller updates, but for the time being we can expect a bit until the next one. However, if they deliver like they did with Gloomrot, then I think these waits will continue to be worth it. We just have to hope the community sticks around and stays patient. The philosophy that it's okay to put this game down and return is something that has struggled with in the current gaming climate. Players like to be addicted to their quote-unquote main game, and when it quote dies, it is dead to them. To truly bring back the player base again, they'll need to come out with some big updates, but what do I think those should be? There's 4 key things that I think need to be altered or added to the game for it to continue to thrive. Some of these things, if not all of them, go in tandem with things that the devs have talked about adding. And honestly, some of these things I think being added would really help with the replayability and to keep the population sticking around longer between the large updates they are doing. So I'll go idea to idea here and get your thoughts. Now, of course, before I get into the ideas, if you like this content, like and subscribe, blah, blah, blah. Follow me, twitch.tv/Redlaf, blah, blah, blah. You know the whole drill. The in-game loop. I think a core issue the game currently suffers from is the lack of any in-game loop. Once you play through the content, it's hard stop, and you're either forced to find some content to keep you engaged, like decorating a castle or farming for perfect gold legendaries, or you hop off that server. This is a huge issue for PvP servers that, despite the new content and added grind, most PvP servers are still only lasting 1 to 3 weeks at best. This in turn causes huge burnouts for players who grind all that each time, and it pushes out casual players from engaging in PvP servers as they don't see a reason why if the server will be dead after a few days. One of the biggest things they need to do is add some type of proper in-game loop that players can engage in. Otherwise, when you hit the in-game and you have full Blood Moon armor and gold legendary weapons, all you can do is raid or just regrind extra resources or whatever. There's not an actual consistent activity you can do. There are a few things that I think would work as an in-game loop, and before I get into them, I do think all activities in the game should happen on the world map. What I mean by this is I don't think any instance content should exist, as it would take players out of the world and would very much hurt PvP in my opinion. Instead, there could be a cool level lock zone, places you need to be max gear that you can go into and fight over super rare items and bosses to get special loot. This could be where special armor drops outside of Blood Moon, or cool cosmetics exist, or who knows what. A place in the game that allows access to a near endless cycle that PvE servers can grind in and PvP servers can fight in would really amplify the gameplay. And I'm not talking about Brighthaven, but someplace truly held and locked behind being late game. I know, speaking of Brighthaven, that some of the best PvP in the game I get is random fights there, so having a location dedicated to a grind loop and a central spot to fight would really help keep players focused once they beat all progression. I do want to preface, however, that we do know from data mining that Blood Moon armor and gold legendary weapons are most likely not the final end of progression. Most likely with final zones being added there will be a couple more tiers of progression to go through, most likely one big final one that corresponds with the last zone or 2 zones when the game launches. They also talked in the past that they plan on adding some type of system with perhaps Dracula. Now again, this is all speculation based off like their dev blog posts, and everything is up to change that they have said many times, but clearly they're looking at some type of system. It might be a political system for you to engage in as an in-game loop activity. But we know that we aren't actually at the full in-game yet. There's clearly more progression to be done, so something like this most likely not ready to come out until launch. Raid Revamp. For all my fellow PvP players, we all know this is something that needs a lot of love, and luckily Stunlock has acknowledged that raid revamps is something they are exploring and trying to improve on, if not it's their next key focus. As of now, raids are a bit one-dimensional and not that rewarding. The current meta of Honeycomb's to stall just turns raids to not be intuitive and have any actual PvP. Servant balancing is constantly out of whack, and the new addition of disabled defenses in hopes of balancing PvP just makes things bland and negates any reason to do any cool defenses on your higher tier floors. Overall, raiding is stale, costly, and oftentimes unrewarding. And that is all if it's online raiding. I won't even get into offline raiding. Now, not all things about raiding is bleak, and overall I do enjoy a good raid for the content of raiding or defending a raid, but there's a lot that needs to be revamped here. Creating actual castle defenses and not just honeycombing is a huge priority in my eyes. Raid defenses should be about setting traps, fighting with various defenses you have, and actually engaging a battle and not just cheesing a win. In my ideal world, there would be defense structures like turrets or spike traps or something that would require space so less walls exist so you can't just hide behind honeycombs. Also, raiding someone should be more than just siege golems. There should be more tools, different types of siege golems depending on what defenses might be, and more types of tools than explosives to get in. A long time ago, a sulfur golem was data mined as a new type of raid mechanic. If both raiders and raid defenders have different tools to strategize over, then that would immensely make them more creative and engaging. Overall, there are a lot of things they can add to raiding to make it more fleshed out, and an enjoyable system, then I just hope to see them do it. In-game events to bring the player base together again after Farbane PvP. Now, for those who don't exactly understand what I'm talking about, in my experience doing countless PvP wipes both pre-Gloomrot and post-Gloomrot, there are 2 main forms of PvP that happen organically in the game. The first is within the first few hours of a server launch, there's usually a ton of action in Farbane. That is because everyone is all concentrated in one zone primarily and equally leveled, so you see a lot of action happening at key points of interest like the Copper Mine, around the Bandit Armory, around Clive, and more. These are usually copper tier weapon fights as everyone is trying to gain an edge in progression to get to iron and progress faster. Again, this only usually lasts for the first few hours of a server. After that, PvP fights become much more sporadic and harder to consistently come by as players spread out across the map and are in different tiers of progression as they all have different amount of time to play and skill to speedrun. The PvP starts occurring consistently again once a majority are in the late game and fighting in either Brighthaven or Gloomrot North or doing raids. Once the server gets to this point, however, players are usually dropping out because they either got raided or they're bored. It's a shame there aren't key ways to bring players back together across the map once they are spread out to help keep consistent action as an option, both throughout the mid-game and as something to do in the late game. To this, I think more natural in-game events occurring would greatly do that for PvP, and also just be a cool thing for PvE servers to be able to do. I wanted to give a shout out to the server Embrace the Suck, because this is something the admins do manually to help solve this problem. They'll do random events like escort missions where the last team standing with an admin as a human is brought from location A to B gets rewards. When they did this, easily half the server, if not more, showed up in all sorts of tiers of weapons and armors and just duked it out. Various things like this could be implemented naturally to help draw players who are spread across the map into one central spot. I know the devs have talked a lot about caravans, and that's easily something they could do to help out with this. So just some type of event or activity that brings people together throughout the game beyond just raiding or just, Brighthaven PvP or the first 2 hours of the game PvP would really just enhance and make the server feel more alive. And then lastly, there's just the miscellaneous content that would intrigue players. What I'm talking about here is like the raw expansion of the game and the current content, similar to what they did with a new zone and Gloomrot and Revamp bosses throughout like Dunley and such. So, a new Frost Mountain zone that might have like the giants that they teased a while back ago, new weapons like the ones that were potentially data mined, like the longbow, the necromantic dagger, or the rapier, like stuff like that, and new bosses and stuff are obviously things that we want more of. We want them to add on, keep expanding on. So that's clearly a key thing that's in the pipeline for what's next for V-Rising, and obviously something they should add. Overall, I think if these things start coming out in the next patch, the game will continue shaping up to be in a good spot. Gloomrot set the framework for a lot of things, and now it's time to add content that will help extend the life of servers to prevent burnout and retain players longer than a couple of weeks. And Stelmach has shown they can do it, so let's hope they do.